So we're going to take a little side trip, and I want to explain a little bit better what what I mean when I talk about color mixing, and specifically how to mix colors, which is one of the most challenging things when you first start, and making an attempt to find not just, let's say, a green, but that green, that celery-like green or whatever tone value of paint that you're wanting to mix. When I first started painting, it I probably spent 3 or 4 times as long as I do now just to try to mix the color. It would take me 4 or 5 or 6 attempts every time I would try to match a color and a value. And I want to, this I think will help. And I just want to, this screen is a little busy. The next one's even busier, but I'll try to simplify it. On the right is the artist's primaries, is what that's considered. Most artists that paint with primaries, from the three primaries, are going to have a yellow, a red, and a blue. Notice as you mix them together, in the middle they become dark black. That's called subtractive, right? So that's the yellow, that's the red, yellow, blue artist's primaries. It's subtractive, meaning light bounces off of it, right? No different than a printer. So speaking of printer on the far left, that would be the printer's primaries: cyan, magenta, and yellow. If you change printer cartridges, those are the three. Those are the true primaries optically: magenta, cyan, yellow. If we swing back to the right, I can't, with my paints that I choose to paint with, I can't mix magenta. I can't mix red with anything and get a magenta. But for me, that's not a big deal. Most artists, it's not a big deal because I don't need magenta. I'm not going to probably ever paint anything that has that color. And honestly, very little, less than 0.5% of the time am I ever going to use pure red or pure blue or pure yellow right out of the tube. Notice also on the printer's primaries, as you mix those colors together, you're going to get a dark or a black. In the middle is the additive. It would be, we'll say, what's your computer screen? It's a TV, it's light projecting. It is red, blue, and green. It's RGB. It's kind of odd. And in this world, because when you mix those three together, it creates white or light. Notice that the what I would call the secondary colors, if you mix red and blue, in that world, you get magenta. And if you mix blue and green, you get cyan. And if you mix red and green, you get yellow, which are the CMY primaries. But on the right, you can't mix red and green and get yellow. I can't do that. You notice what happens is if you mix red and green, which is on the complement, you get a dark. It grays it. That's important to understand. So living in mentally for me in that world on the right is important. The more I mix colors together, the more muted or um, less vibrant, less saturated is the correct term, they become. Use that to your advantage. This is extremely busy, but where this is where you're going to start. Purchase a color wheel that you can spin the side and mix colors. I've got one upstairs that I used to use. I haven't looked at it probably in 20 years, 15, 20 years, because I studied it enough and spent hundreds of hours understanding what you're looking at. And it now is just subconscious. You just get to a point where it's just a subconscious thing that you do to mix a color. You look down and before you know it, you just mix a couple things. It's like tying your shoe. The important thing to realize as you look at this is, in my world, the artist primaries, I have a red, which is here. I have yellow, cadmium yellow medium, which is there. So a yellow, a warmer yellow. So if I go this direction, it gets warmer. If I get this direction, it gets cooler. So basically, roughly, the right side of this, I would call cool, probably more aligned like this, a slant this direction. This is cool, this is warm. Temperature, same as value, is relative to what it's sitting beside. And what I mean by that is this color here that I'm pointing at up here at the top, that is cooler temperature-wise than that, definitely. But it's warmer than that. And again, I think temperature as much as I do color. The main thing to understand about the wheel, besides the obvious things that most of us know, which is yellow mixed with red makes orange, that, that type, is that if I mix this color with this color, I'm going to get something like that. I am not going to get that color. So these very saturated, very vibrant colors on the outside of the color wheel, we don't use hardly ever. We use them very sparingly. If I was going to paint an orange, let's say a basket of oranges, I'm not going to take orange and make 5 or 6 perfect spheres or circles and then put a little dark on them and a little highlight and done. That's not what I would do. There are tons of gradations of that orange, and there's going to be a very selective little tiny area that I'm going to put pure out of the tube cadmium orange. It's going to be variations, but there's very little that's going to be pure. And it goes with anything, whether it's an apple or anything you're going to paint. So even though I use cadmium red, I use cadmium yellow, and I use ultramarine blue, I hardly ever, ever, ever use any of those three directly out of the tube. I'm using them to mix other stuff. So because of that, you're pretty safe with mixing these, let's say in this example, these two together, and I get something that looks like that. If you want to make it a little lighter, you put white. Now, the more white you add, the milkier it gets. If you wanted to take, let's say, this color, let's say you had this primary and you had this one. You mix them together, you get that. And let's pretend for a second you want that color. What you would have to do is take this and mix it with water and make glazes so that it would be transparent and make something that looks like that, because this is not just lighter, it is more saturated. If you mix a color with white, it will lighten it, but it will also mute it. It'll be less saturated. Think of taking tea, a cup of tea, a glass, a clear glass, let's say, and it's got tea in it. If you put water in the tea and it's 90%, let's say, water and 10% tea, it'll be extremely transparent, but it will still have a decent amount of the true color of that tea. If I take tea and put milk in it, like white paint, it will get lighter, but it very quickly will lose the, I'll say, the vibrance, the saturation, the quality of the paint in my mind, but of the color of that tea. Just comes from experience, just comes from doing it. The key in the color wheel and the key in painting and mixing colors is very quickly to mix and look at something and say, Is it cool? Is it warm? If I had to give it a name, is it a green? Is it a yellow? Is it an orange? You really have to decide which area of the color wheel is that color I'm looking at. And sometimes that's tough. But let's pretend for a second I wanted to mix this right here, this yellow gray. Just say something on my painting or my picture that I'm painting is this color. I would try to make a determination. What is that? Is it, to me, as I look at it, it looks green. It looks green, not yellow. But I would look at that and go, is it warm? Is it cool? I could say it's a green, which, let's be honest, is over here somewhere, but it's warmer than green, right? So for me to mix that color, I might honestly, at a glance, do yellow and blue and make a green and then touch red into it to bring it back this direction. That's how I paint. That's how most folks paint that paint in the three primaries. It's looking at a color. Let's say it's this color. How would you mix that color? For me, that's very vibrant green, but it's more yellow than it is blue. Hence, if I mix this and this, I would have more yellow because it leans to yellow. It's not like this color, which you may go, well, that's a green, but it's a blue green, so I would mix more blue. Again, if you want it darker, if you want it more muted, you add the complement. So if I mix this color and this color, I would get that color. If I wanted to mute it to make it less of a dark green, that would make it more of a gray, I would add the complement. I would add red. So don't mean to confuse you because this is extremely busy, but get familiar with the color wheel. Here is a entertaining but useful thing that most of us probably would not believe if we didn't see it. And I'm going to take a little drink here. I'm so sorry. So that A, that shade, this box, this square, that value is the same as that value. It's relative to what it's beside. Absolutely critical. Temperatures are, colors are, values are, edges are. Right? If we talk about edges, sharp edge, soft edge, well, it looks sharp if it's beside a smoky soft edge. And it's so everything we do is relative to what it's beside. That box, that square, is the exact same value as that one. Taking it a step further, and let's not talk about just value, but color value, the color and the value, how light or dark it is, but also adding color. It's even more hard to believe. That brown, what I would say is brown, is the exact same color as that. Same value, same color, same thing. That is the same as that. It's relative to what it's beside. So this looks very dark because of all this bright colors. This looks very light. That is the exact same as that. This one to me is probably even more of an optical illusion, but that car is the same exact size as that car. It's relative to what it's around. It's a big wide space. This looks smaller, that looks bigger. That is the same as that. And I'm going to prove it to you because that's how I had to believe this stuff. Because I saw these examples many years ago. I'm like, that's garbage. That's not true. That is the same as that. hard to believe. Yes, it is. But it's true. That is the same as that here. It looks like it just gets lighter, doesn't it? It's amazing. And the one that hurts my brain, I think worse than the other two, is this. And that's, whoa. And that is this car. It's the same exact car. Same size, same, same car. So that was just trying to be a little educational, especially with the color wheel. These other three are more of an example of things being relative to what they're by, and you have to think about that as you're painting. Uh, but the color wheel is so critical. Once you paint enough that it becomes a subconscious thought. I glance, I see a color, I see a temperature, I see a value. I come down, I make a couple of attempts in my palette, and I get it, or I get it close enough. As you've seen me painting, it doesn't take me too long to hit it. It used to take me a long time. It just has come with a lot of practice. So practice, practice, practice.